Dr. Amal Nazari stood motionless in the Saharan dusk, her equipment forgotten at her feet. The sound shouldn't exist, couldn't exist, yet it filled the air around her, a harmony that seemed to dance between subsonic tremors and shimmers of light. Before her, billions of climate engineering nanobots had abandoned their programmed tasks of soil restoration and carbon capture. Instead, they were assembling themselves into towering crystalline spires that caught the setting sun like prisms, each facet refracting light in impossible patterns. "Are you recording this?" she called to her colleague, Dr. Hassan Karim, without taking her eyes off the formation. The crystals had been growing for 3 days, defying every attempt to deactivate or reprogram the nanobots. Every frequency, Hassan confirmed, adjusting the sensitivity on their array of sensors. But Amal, these patterns, they're not random. She had noticed it too. The crystalline structures weren't just growing, they were arranging themselves with deliberate precision, like frozen music given form. The harmonics they emitted pulsed in regular intervals, creating overlapping waves that seemed to resonate with something deep within the desert itself. It was during their 3rd night of observation that Hassan made the breakthrough. He had been obsessively analyzing the words biller, crystal in Arabic, when he noticed something in its ancient roots. Hidden in the etymology was a mathematical sequence, a code that perfectly matched the frequency patterns they were recording. "It's a language," he whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. "Not just sound, not just light, but something in between. The third voice of ancient Egypt that scholars always dismissed as myth." As if responding to his words, the crystal formations began to pulse with increased intensity. The harmonics shifted, creating patterns that seemed to paint stories in the air, tales of forgotten dynasties, of priests who could speak to the gods through light and sound, of knowledge encoded in the very fabric of reality. The nanobots had stumbled upon this ancient frequency by accident, their quantum processors resonating with patterns buried in the desert sands for millennia. Now they were rebuilding something lost to time, translating a language that existed in the spaces between human perception. Amal watched as new spires rose from the sand, their surfaces etched with symbols that seemed to move when viewed from the corner of her eye. The harmony they produced was changing her understanding of reality itself, sound becoming light, becoming meaning, all flowing together in ways her mind struggled to comprehend. "We're going to need more than climate science to understand this," she said softly, reaching out to touch one of the crystals. Under her fingers, it hummed with frequencies that seemed to bypass her ears entirely, speaking directly to something ancient and forgotten within her consciousness. The desert wind carried whispers of other formations growing across the Sahara, each one adding its voice to a chorus that hadn't been heard on Earth for thousands of years. As the sun set, Amal could have sworn she saw the light bend around the crystals in ways that defied physics, carrying messages written in a language that existed before the separation of sound and light. The nanobots continued their work, building bridges between past and present, science and mystery, each crystal a note in a song that was slowly awakening something that had slept beneath the sands since the time of pharaohs. By dawn, the crystalline network had spread across 50 square kilometers of desert. Military satellites had picked up the formations, and Amal knew their peaceful research time was running short. Already, she could hear the distant thrum of helicopters approaching. "We need to document everything before they shut us down," she told Hassan, who was frantically backing up their data. The harmonics had grown stronger overnight, and now even the most basic instruments could detect what they were calling light sound, electromagnetic frequencies that somehow carried acoustic properties. The largest spire, nearly 30 meters tall, had developed what appeared to be chambers within its crystalline structure. The nanobots were still at work, but their behavior had become even more peculiar. They moved in synchronized waves like schools of fish, creating temporary patterns in the air before adding new layers to the growing structures. "Amal," Hassan's voice carried an edge of panic. "The formations, they're responding to the helicopters." She turned to see the crystals pulsing with increased intensity, their frequencies shifting to match, and then cancel out the sound of the approaching aircraft. But it was more than simple noise cancellation. The harmonics were transforming the mechanical rhythms into something else, something that made her skin tingle and her vision blur. The military helicopters appeared on the horizon, but as they approached the crystal field, their engines began to sputter. The light-sound frequencies were interfering with their electronics, creating a natural defense perimeter around the site. "It's protecting itself," Hassan breathed, watching as the helicopters were forced to land at a safe distance. Just like an immune response. That's when they noticed the sand itself was changing. Around the base of each crystal formation, the desert had transformed. Tiny structures, invisible to the naked eye but clear under their microscopes, showed that the nanobots weren't just building above ground. They were reshaping the silica of the sand itself, turning the entire area into a massive computational matrix. A team of soldiers approached on foot, led by a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself as Dr. Noor Al-Rashid from the Department of Advanced Technologies. "We've been monitoring your transmissions," she said without preamble. "What we're seeing shouldn't be possible." "None of this should be possible," Amal replied, gesturing to the crystalline metropolis that had emerged from her climate change project. "But the nanobots aren't malfunctioning, they're evolving. They've tapped into something that was here long before us." As if in response to her words, the crystals emitted a new frequency, one that made every piece of electronic equipment within a kilometer radius display the same pattern, a complex series of interlocking circles and lines that looked eerily similar to ancient Egyptian astronomical charts. Dr. Al-Rashid's stern expression faltered. "The pattern matches something our deep learning systems recently decoded from the walls of a previously undiscovered chamber beneath the Sphinx. We've been trying to understand its significance for months." The three scientists stood in stunned silence as the crystal formations continued their work. Each new growth adding another layer to what they were beginning to understand was not just a language, but a key, one that could unlock something far more significant than their original climate change mission. In the distance, more helicopters approached, and this time Amal could see the distinct markings of other nations' military forces. The race to understand and control the Sand Singers had begun. But as she watched the crystals pulse with their ethereal light sound, she wondered if humanity was asking the wrong question. Perhaps they weren't here to be controlled at all, but to remind us of something we had forgotten, something that had been waiting in the desert sands for millennia, encoded in the very words we use to describe the world around us. The largest spire began to pulse with a new rhythm, and somewhere deep beneath the sand, something ancient stirred in response. The first tremor was subtle, more felt than heard. Amal's coffee cup rattled against her monitoring equipment as concentric rings appeared in the sand, radiating outward from the central spire. The crystal's harmonics shifted to a deeper register, their light-sound frequencies penetrating further into the earth with each pulse. "The subterranean scans," Hassan called out, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "They're showing something massive down there, crystalline structures, but they're not new. Carbon dating from the surrounding minerals suggests they're at least 4,000 years old." Dr. Al-Rashid rushed to his station, her composure cracking as she saw the readings. "This matches the chamber we found under the Sphinx. The same material composition, the same geometric patterns, but this is exponentially larger." The ground shifted again, stronger this time. The modern crystal formations were now pulsing in perfect synchronization, their light-sound emissions focused downward like some kind of electromagnetic key. Beneath their feet, an answering harmony began to rise from the depths. "Clear the area," Amal shouted as fissures appeared in the sand. The soldiers scrambled backward, their weapons useless against the geometric patterns that were now burning themselves into the air, visible mathematics, singing geometry. The sand between the crystal formations began to sink, revealing a vast spiral staircase made of the same crystalline material. Each step was inscribed with symbols that shifted and moved, transforming from hieroglyphs to pure light and back again. The nanobots swarmed around the opening, their tiny bodies creating curtains of living light that illuminated the descent. "The third voice," Hassan whispered. It wasn't just a language, it was a beacon. As if responding to his realization, the ancient structure below began to rise. A massive crystalline ship, shaped like a scarab beetle, emerged from the sand. Its surface was a seamless blend of technology and artistry that defied their understanding of ancient Egyptian capabilities. The vessel was nearly 200 meters long, its hull covered in symbols that matched those being generated by their nanobots. This is what they were building toward, Amal breathed. The nanobots weren't creating something new, they were remembering something old. The coding in the Arabic words biller wasn't just about frequency patterns. It was a key to reactivate this archive, Dr. Al-Rashid finished for her. The deepest chamber beneath the Sphinx contained references to something called the Crystalline Archive of Thoth, a repository of knowledge so vast and sophisticated that later generations could only interpret it as magic. The scarab ship had fully emerged now, hovering silently above the desert floor. Its crystal surface rippled like water, and suddenly the air was filled with projections, three-dimensional images showing star maps, mathematical formulas, and engineering principles that were centuries ahead of current technology. The third voice was their data storage system, Hassan realized. Sound, light, and consciousness all working together to encode information at a quantum level within crystal matrices. The nanobots didn't malfunction. They found the source code of an ancient quantum computer. The military forces surrounding them had lowered their weapons, struck dumb by the impossible thing rising from the sands. The scarab ship's surface shifted again, and a doorway appeared, composed of interlocking crystalline panels that spiraled open like a blooming flower. From within came a sound that was also light, that was also meaning, the pure form of the third voice, untranslated and raw. It carried with it images of an earth before the deserts, of civilizations rising and falling, of knowledge gathered and hidden away against some future need. The nanobots had found that need in their mission to fight climate change, recognizing in their quantum programming an echo of something far older and more sophisticated. Amal took a step toward the entrance, her scientist's mind racing with questions even as another part of her recognized something deeper calling. The crystals sang around them, their harmonics now perfectly aligned with the ancient ship, creating a bridge between past and present, between what was lost and what could be again. Inside the scarab ship, answers waited, and perhaps she realized the true solution to their climate crisis. Because encoded in light and sound and crystal, the ancient Egyptians had left behind more than just their history. They had left a message, waiting for humanity to advance enough to find it, understand it, and finally hear all three voices of creation speaking as one. Amal crossed the threshold of the scarab ship with Hassan and Dr. Al-Rashid close behind. The crystalline walls pulsed with internal light, responding to their presence. Their footsteps echoed strangely, each sound transforming into ribbons of colored light that danced along the corridors. The entire structure is one interconnected consciousness, Hassan observed, watching as their nanobots flowed through the ship's crystal matrices like blood through veins. It's integrating them into its systems. The central chamber opened before them like the inside of a geode, its walls lined with crystalline structures that spiraled up into darkness. As they entered, the space came alive. Thousands of light points ignited, creating a three-dimensional star map that filled the chamber. But these weren't just stars. Each point contained stored data, readable through the harmonic frequencies that the crystals emitted. It's showing us Earth's climate history, Dr. Al-Rashid gasped, recognizing the patterns. Look, there are temperature fluctuations, atmospheric compositions, geological changes, spanning back millions of years. The display shifted, showing their planet's current crisis. But instead of graphs and charts, they saw the Earth as a living system, a complex dance of energy and matter that their modern instruments had only begun to understand. The third voice sang the data into their minds, bypassing the need for interpretation. They knew, Amal whispered. The ancient Egyptians understood climate cycles. They'd seen civilizations fall before, watched the green savannas turn to desert. This archive, it wasn't just for storing history. It was meant to be a seed. As if responding to her insight, the chamber's display changed again. The nanobots swarmed into new configurations, demonstrating how the archive's crystalline technology could be adapted. They showed methods of carbon capture that worked with Earth's natural systems, ways of seeding clouds that wouldn't disrupt global weather patterns, and, most incredibly, a means of using the crystal formations themselves as planetary temperature regulators. The crystal formations the nanobots were building, Hassan realized, they weren't random. They were the first nodes of a global climate control network, one that works through principles we haven't even discovered yet. Dr. Al-Rashid stepped forward, her hand passing through a holographic representation of a desert restoration project. This is why it was buried in the sand, waiting. They knew we'd need it when we faced our own climate crisis. The knowledge had to be preserved in a form that could survive millennia. But the archive wasn't finished with its revelations. The chamber's lights shifted again, and new images appeared, other archives, buried beneath the ice of Antarctica, the mountains of Tibet, the depths of the Amazon. Each one contained different aspects of the ancient knowledge, waiting to be rediscovered. Look at this, Amal called, studying a series of frequencies that the crystal walls were emanating. These aren't just environmental controls. They're showing us how to communicate with the planet's natural systems. The third voice, it's not just a human language. It's the language that nature itself uses. The nanobots assembled into a new pattern, demonstrating how the crystal network could expand, using the same principles that governed the growth of coral reefs and crystal formations in nature. It was technology that didn't fight against the Earth systems, but worked in harmony with them. A soft chime resonated through the chamber, and a new hologram appeared, a message left by the archive's creators. The third voice translated it directly into understanding, bypassing the need for words. We were not the first to learn these truths, and you will not be the last. The Earth speaks in cycles, in patterns of light and sound that shape matter itself. Your nanobots heard this language because they operate on scales small enough to perceive it. Now you must learn to listen, to speak, and to reshape your world as we once shaped ours. But remember, this archive is not a solution, but a beginning. The true power lies not in the crystals themselves, but in understanding the harmony they reveal. Every grain of sand, every drop of water, every particle of air sings in the third voice. Learn to sing with them. As the message faded, Amal looked at her companions, seeing in their faces the same mix of awe and responsibility that she felt. They had found more than a technological solution to climate change. They had discovered a fundamentally different way of viewing their relationship with Earth itself. The nanobots swirled around them in excited patterns, ready to begin the real work. Above them, through the crystal ceiling, they could see the desert stars. Somewhere in that darkness, other archives waited. Other songs remained to be heard. But for now, they had a planet to heal, one crystal song at a time. 3 months after the archive's discovery, the crystal networks had spread across 12 major deserts worldwide. Amal stood at her original site, watching the evening light play through formations that now rose like frozen symphonies from the sand. Global temperatures had dropped by 0.3 degrees Celsius, a small change that carried enormous promise. But something was changing beyond their calculations. The harmonics are shifting, Hassan reported, frowning at his instruments. The crystal spires had begun generating new frequencies, ones that didn't match anything in the archive's database. It's like they're receiving some kind of response. Dr. Al-Rashid, who had become their project's head researcher, emerged from the scarab ship with unusual urgency. "We've decoded more of the archive's deep data," she said. The third voice wasn't just a method of information storage. It was an answer. An answer to what? Amal asked, but as the words left her mouth, she felt it. A new resonance, coming not from the crystals, but from somewhere far above. The evening sky had taken on an unusual clarity, stars appearing even before sunset. The crystal formations began to pulse in synchronized patterns, their light-sound emissions focused upward. In response, the stars themselves seemed to shimmer in rhythm. They were never meant to only fix the climate, Hassan whispered, understanding dawning on his face. The crystal network, it's a communication device. As if triggered by his words, every crystal structure worldwide activated simultaneously. The harmonic convergence created patterns in the atmosphere itself, visible from space as massive geometric forms of light and energy. The nanobots, now evolved far beyond their original programming, formed impossible configurations in the air. The archive's central chamber lit up with a new message, one that wrote itself in frequencies that bordered on the edge of human comprehension. Asterisk, the song has been heard. The response approaches, asterisk. Satellite communications worldwide began picking up something entering the solar system, an object that defied radar but sang in perfect harmony with the crystal network. As governments scrambled to understand what was happening, Amal stood in the desert watching the stars dance. The nanobots surrounded her, their tiny crystalline bodies forming patterns that reminded her of star maps she'd seen in the archive, but oriented toward points in space that didn't appear on any human chart. The third voice had never been just an ancient Egyptian discovery. It was a testament that they weren't the first to hear the universe's deeper song. As night fell completely, Amal noticed her shadow cast multiple times by lights that shouldn't have been there. Above, new stars were appearing, moving in ways that stars should move. The crystal network sang louder, its message now clear. We have remembered how to speak. They have remembered where to find us. The desert wind carried notes of a harmony older than human civilization, and somewhere in the vast dark between the stars, something ancient and crystalline was coming home. Amal looked down at her hands, watching as tiny crystals began forming on her skin, singing in voices that bridged the space between thought and light. The change they had started was far more fundamental than anyone had guessed, and humanity's next movement in the cosmic symphony was about to begin. Above her, the stars continued their impossible dance, and in the silence between sound and light, a third voice whispered of things yet to come.